In 1992, 17-year-old Emma Harper vanishes during her high school's annual ski trip in the Colorado Rockies. Her disappearance is dismissed as a tragic accident until 7 years later, a chimney flue inside an abandoned lodge reveals her boots, clean and untouched. As investigators reopen the case, they uncover a secret web of betrayal, a hidden relationship, and a trail that leads disturbingly close to home. The charter bus hissed as it came to a stop, tires crunching over compact snow, its windows fogged by the breath of 30 teenagers eager to escape. Emma Harper pressed her forehead to the glass, her reflection pale and stretched by frost. The Rocky Mountains stood like silent sentinels in the distance, draped in fresh powder beneath a soft February sky. It was their annual senior ski trip, and the air buzzed with anticipation, laughter echoing through the open doors as boots thudded onto frozen ground. Emma stepped off last, the strap of her camera bag slung across her chest. She blinked against the bright sun and took it all in the rustic wood of Pine Vale Lodge, the ski lifts in the distance, the winding tree-lined trails she couldn't wait to explore. She wore a red parka and white snow pants, her boots already dusted with the beginnings of a storm they hadn't yet been warned about. Behind her, Kelsey ran up, tossing a snowball at one of the boys near the luggage rack. Emma laughed, caught the moment on film. She'd brought 3 disposable cameras, one for each day. "Proof we were young once," she'd joked, but even then there was something wistful in her tone, as if she already sensed that not every story had a photo to remember it by. Inside the lodge, the smell of pine cleaner and hot chocolate filled the air. The group chattered about slope difficulty in room pairings. Chaperones checked clipboards. No one noticed when Emma slipped away for a moment, standing quietly near the stone fireplace in the great room. She reached out and touched the iron grate absently, like it whispered something only she could hear. Later, she'd unpack slowly. She'd write something in her notebook. She'd look out the window and watch the first snowflakes begin to fall. No one would realize that this bright afternoon, with its promise of cold air and mountain trails, would be the last time they'd see her. Emma Harper would vanish into that landscape like a breath into winter air, and the mountain would hold its secret close. The day moved fast, like snow melting under the sun, fleeting, glittering, deceptively easy. By late afternoon, the slopes buzzed with energy, the sound of skis carving down trails and lift cables humming overhead. Emma had already taken 2 runs, her laughter lost in the cold wind, cheeks flushed pink beneath her goggles. Kelsey begged her to stop for cocoa, but Emma shook her head, grinning as she adjusted the strap on her helmet. "One more," she called. "I want to try the North Trail before it gets dark." Kelsey rolled her eyes. "You're gonna get stuck out there." Emma just winked. "Then you'll have to come find me." And then she was off, poles tucked tight, red parka vanishing between the trees like a flag waving goodbye. No one noticed when dinner came and went without her. At first it felt like nothing. She was always late, always trailing off with her camera or journal. Maybe she'd stayed behind to write. Maybe she was in her room. Maybe she'd fallen asleep with her headphones on, music too loud to hear the knocks. It wasn't until 9:12 p.m. that someone started to worry. Her bed was untouched. Her boots were missing. Her camera bag still hung from the bedpost, unopened. A chaperone called the front desk. The front desk called ski patrol. The lodge manager called the sheriff. Snow had started falling harder now, fast and thick, the kind that muffles sound and hides footprints almost as quickly as they're made. By 10:30 p.m., searchlights swept the trees. Volunteers trudged through thigh-deep snow, calling her name between gusts of wind. Flashlights danced across branches. The chairlifts hung motionless, cables creaking like quiet warnings. Kelsey stood at the edge of the clearing, coat too thin, fists stuffed in her pockets. She kept whispering to herself, "She always comes back." But Emma didn't. Somewhere between the lodge and the North Trail, she had vanished. No scream, no trail, no goodbye. Just a red coat in a sea of white, swallowed by the dark. And the mountain never said a word. By sunrise, the mountain had swallowed every trace of her. The snowfall overnight had been heavier than expected, blanketing the lodge grounds in nearly 2 feet of white silence. Plows hadn't reached the trailheads yet, and everything looked untouched, pristine, still like nothing had ever happened. But inside the Pine Vale Lodge, panic had begun to root. The sheriff arrived just after dawn, a tall man with weathered skin and eyes that scanned for what wasn't there. He listened without speaking, as chaperones described the night before. A ski patrol officer pointed out the trail Emma had last mentioned, but there were no new tracks to follow. If she'd gone out there, the snow had buried her completely. Volunteers suited up again. Locals joined in. They brought dogs, snowmobiles, drones. For 3 days they combed the slopes, the woods, the base of every drop-off and ravine. Her parents arrived on the second day, pale and broken, voices cracking as they called her name into trees that didn't answer. They found nothing. No scarf, no glove, no broken branch or footprint pressed into crusted snow. On the 4th day, the search narrowed. They checked the lake, still frozen near the surface but cracking in the middle. The sheriff knelt by the edge, watching the ice shift. "If she went in," he said quietly, "we won't find her until spring." The lodge closed early. The remaining students were sent home on a bus that felt too quiet. Kelsey stayed behind, refusing to leave. She stood outside Emma's room and stared at the closed door like it might open on its own. Inside, her friend's suitcase remained half-packed. A pair of warm socks still folded on the pillow. No one said the word dead, not yet. They said lost and missing and gone off trail. They offered theories that felt safe wrong turn, weather, confusion, a tragic accident. But nothing about Emma had ever felt careless. She had vanished between one breath and the next, with no struggle, no signal, no chance. And all the mountain gave back was snow. The memorial service was held 2 weeks later, even though no one could agree if it should be. Some said it was too soon, without a body, without proof. Others whispered it was necessary, if only to stop the rumors. Emma's parents sat in the front pew of the town's small chapel, their hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white. Her mother hadn't slept in days. Her father hadn't spoken more than 5 words since returning from the lodge. Kelsey stood at the podium, her voice shaking as she read a poem Emma had once scribbled in the margins of her math book. It wasn't very good, something about pine trees and breath and snow, but it was all she had. She read it like it was gospel, like it might summon her friend back from wherever the mountain had taken her. Behind her, the stained glass window cast red and blue shards across the floor, and the light moved slowly, as if reluctant to touch the space where Emma should have been. Outside, classmates gathered in tight huddles, whispering theories they couldn't say in front of adults. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she was pregnant. Maybe she got lost and froze. Maybe she'd never even left the lodge. That one made people pause just long enough to remember the locked utility doors, the boiler room no one checked. But the adults said that was nonsense, and the police had cleared it all. The case was closed without ever being declared solved. Emma was filed as presumed deceased, body unrecovered. Her belongings were returned to her family. Her name was engraved on a bench outside the high school, facing the athletic field she'd once photographed for the yearbook. Kelsey visited it every week, leaving pine cones or little folded notes beneath the seat, the kind of things they used to pass in class, secrets that no one else would understand. But the bench stayed cold. The letters never moved. And in the distance, the mountain stood unchanged, watching, unmoved, as if it knew the truth and simply didn't care to share it. Emma was gone. And no one knew why. By the time spring rolled around, the snow had melted, but the questions hadn't. The mountain trails reopened, hikers returned, and the lodge hosted its summer campers without a mention of the girl who'd disappeared just a few months earlier. Life, as it often does, moved on for most. But not for everyone. Emma's mother still called the sheriff's office every Friday at noon, asking if there were updates. The receptionist would pause, gently place her on hold, and let the line sit silent for exactly 3 minutes before returning with the same soft words. "Nothing new yet, Mrs. Harper." Her father took to walking long, meandering routes around the edges of town, always ending at the train tracks where Emma used to take photos of passing freights. He never explained why. Just stood there, hands in his jacket, waiting for something that never came. Kelsey tried to live in the world as if it hadn't changed. She joined clubs, smiled in photos, went to dances, but her eyes were always scanning, always just a bit off from where they should have been. She'd wake in the middle of the night, convinced she heard skis scraping against wood or a camera shutter clicking in the dark. She stopped sleeping with the window open. Rumors still drifted through the school like smoke. Some swore she was alive, hiding somewhere in the woods like some ghost girl waiting to be found. Others spoke of the Chimney theory, a strange, half-serious idea that Emma had fallen into the lodge's massive stone flue, but no one could explain how, or why no one heard her. The lodge changed ownership a year later. The new owners didn't know the story, or maybe pretended they didn't. They gutted the rooms, painted over the memories, and reopened with brochures promising quiet charm in the heart of the Rockies. It sold well. The slopes stayed busy. 7 years passed. The mountain grew older, so did everyone else. And then, one morning, in the quiet of renovation and dust, something fell from the top of a chimney flue. A pair of snow boots. Still clean. Still white. Emma's initials stitched carefully inside. The boots clattered to the floor like bones in an empty room. The new lodge owners, Paul and Deirdre Maddox, were in the middle of renovating the west wing when it happened. Paul had climbed onto the rooftop to inspect the last of the old stone chimneys. Birds had been nesting up there for years, and the flue was clogged with debris and rusted mesh. He meant to clear it, nothing more. But when he dislodged the final grate and reached in with a gloved hand, the boots came loose, falling straight down the narrow shaft and landing 3 stories below with a hollow, unholy sound. Deirdre screamed. Not because they were boots, but because of how they looked. They weren't rotted or water-stained. They weren't filled with ash. They looked almost new. The laces still intact. The fleece inside still white. As if they'd been placed there gently, then forgotten by time. But they didn't belong to anyone they knew. No guests had stayed in this wing since the closure. And the Maddoxes had only purchased the property a year prior. It was Deirdre who saw the initials First E.H. stitched in red thread along the inside edge of each tongue. She took a photo with her phone and searched the lodge's name online, not expecting much. But when the first article popped up, her hand went to her mouth. Teen girl vanishes on ski trip 1992. Emma Harper. Deirdre stared at the boots again. 17 years old, lost without a trace. And now, here, without warning, the only thing she'd ever left behind. They contacted the sheriff's office immediately. The lodge was closed to the public within the hour. The boots were tagged, sealed, and sent for analysis. But the real investigation was just beginning. Detective Rachel Vega stood over them in the evidence room later that week, the plastic wrapping fogged from the lab's cold storage. She'd been a rookie back in '92, barely a month out of academy. She remembered Emma's photo, the red parka, the smile that didn't reach her eyes. Now, the boots sat in front of her, clean, deliberate, not dropped, placed. The mountain had given something back, and it demanded someone listen. Detective Vega hadn't expected to return to the Harper case. It was one of those stories that buried itself in the cold corners of memory, unresolved, uncomfortable, but eventually dulled by time. Until now. She sat in the lodge's great room, now gutted and stripped of its cozy charm. The fireplace loomed tall at the far end, its stone face blackened by years of disuse. A crew had removed the mesh and pulled out the remaining debris from the flue. Vega stood at its base, tilting her head upward. It was too narrow for a 17-year-old to fall into by accident. There were no signs of a collapse. no broken mortar or dislodged bricks. Just a smooth, vertical chute that hadn't been touched since the lodge closed. The boots didn't make sense. They were pristine, preserved. If they'd been in that flue for 7 years, they should have shown rot, mold, or at least the acidic soot of old wood smoke. But they were nearly perfect, more than that intentional. She pulled out the evidence photos. The stitching on the boots was clear. EH in red thread, looped in Emma's mother's handwriting, according to the original missing persons report. A unique touch. The same pair Emma had worn on the trip, last seen by Kelsey and 2 others as they geared up that morning. No one remembered seeing them after. Vega walked the perimeter of the fireplace, running her fingers along the stonework. There was something odd about it. The bricks to the right side looked newer, out of place. She made a note to request a structural scan. Later that day, she drove to Emma's hometown. The Harpers still lived in the same house, same porch swing, same mailbox leaning sideways on its post. Emma's mother opened the door before Vega even knocked. Her hair was gray now, her eyes sharper than before. They were hers, weren't they? She asked, not as a question, but as a fact already grieved. Vega nodded. She didn't fall, did she? No, Vega said quietly. I don't think she ever left the lodge. The mother closed her eyes. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. 17 years. A silence, finally cracking. And behind it, the truth was starting to breathe. The guest book was missing 6 pages. Detective Vega sat in the town records office, flipping through the yellowed visitor logs from February 1992. Each page was a time capsule, neat cursive names, room numbers, initials of staff checking people in and out. The handwriting shifted, some entries rushed, others careful. But then there was a gap. Page 24 flowed smoothly into 31, as if no one would notice. No note, no explanation, just gone. The clerk at the desk didn't have an answer. Maybe water damage, he offered with a shrug. Or maybe someone pulled him for legal reasons back when the place closed. But Vega knew better. You don't tear out records unless you have something to hide. She left the office and drove back toward the lodge. On the way, she passed the old bus depot where the students had been dropped off all those years ago. It was shuttered now, vines creeping up the stone walls, the windows boarded haphazardly. The past, like the buildings, was rotting in slow motion. Kelsey lived 2 towns over now, teaching art at a community college. She hadn't spoken to the press in years, but when Vega called, she agreed to meet. They sat in a quiet cafe, far from the noise of town gossip. She was scared the week before we left, Kelsey said, stirring her tea. She wouldn't say why. I thought maybe it was about college stuff. Her dad was pushing her toward journalism, and she hated writing. But it felt bigger, heavier. Vega leaned in. Did she mention anyone? An argument? A name? Kelsey hesitated. No name, but she said she saw something. At the lodge the year before, when her sister was there for a winter camp, said she heard crying in the hallway at night and a door slam. She swore someone was in one of the unused staff rooms, even though they were supposed to be locked. And she brought that up again? She said she was going to prove it, said the trip would be a chance. Vega's heart ticked faster. Emma hadn't disappeared by accident. She'd been hunting the truth back then. And now, 7 years later, it was finally rising to meet her. The walls of the lodge felt different now. No longer warm with the scent of pine and hot cocoa, they stood cold, empty, like a relic of something never meant to be forgotten. Detective Vega stood in the heart of the old dining room, watching the last remnants of dust swirl through the air as the construction crew worked around her. The place was almost gutted, floors torn up, walls stripped down to their skeletal frames, but it still felt like Emma's presence was woven into the very beams. As though her absence had permeated the air, settled into the foundations. She had asked the crew to hold off on the renovation of the north wing, the area where Emma and her classmates had been housed. When they reluctantly agreed, Vega spent hours walking the hallways, scanning the rooms, testing for the smallest clue. but all she found were echoes. She had the original lodge blueprints in hand. When she compared them to the actual layout, she noticed an odd discrepancy in the placement of rooms. Room 305, where Emma was supposed to have stayed, was marked as a storage closet on the updated plans. It made no sense. It wasn't mentioned on the old guest logs, and no one had bothered to ask questions. It was just erased. Vega went to the storage closet now, stepping over piles of debris and broken furniture, the musty smell of old wood thick in the air. The door creaked open. Inside, there was only an old rusted filing cabinet, a heap of discarded blankets, and a few defunct electrical cords. But as her flashlight swept across the walls, something caught her eye. A faint scuff mark ran across the floor, beneath a pile of old carpet rolls. She knelt, brushing away the dust. The scuff was deeper than she expected. It was a small hole, jagged and uneven, as though something or someone had been dragged, leaving a mark too distinct to be ignored. Her heartbeat quickened. Someone had been here. Someone had made sure this part of the lodge was hidden from view. But why? Vega paused, her hand against the cold metal of the filing cabinet. It wasn't just the room that had been sealed off. Emma had been here, had discovered something, maybe more than one secret, and it was clear now that someone had wanted to keep her from finding out the truth. The more she uncovered, the less it seemed like an accident. The snow had returned. Thin flurries drifted down the mountainside, brushing against the lodge windows like quiet whispers from the past. Detective Vega stood outside the back entrance, eyes fixed on the chimney that had become the case's centerpiece. It loomed tall and narrow, its gray stones weathered but solid, the flue now empty, save for the questions it refused to answer. She stepped closer. The boots had been found here fallen from above, but too pristine to have weathered 7 winters in stone and ash. She stared into the black void of the opening, feeling its cold breath on her face. There were no scratches on the interior walls, no marks to suggest someone had fallen in or tried to climb out. Which meant only one thing. They'd been placed. And whoever placed them hadn't done it in 1992. Inside the lodge, she followed the chimney structure up through the floors, all the way to the 3rd story. The guest rooms here had been stripped bare, the carpeting pulled back, the walls exposed. She moved slowly, checking the gaps behind insulation and drywall. On the eastern side of the chimney column, she found what she was looking for, a narrow crawl space sealed off with old plywood, edges warped but unbroken. She pried it open. Dust billowed out, thick and stale. The space behind it was barely 3 feet wide, lined with cold stone. At the back was a grated iron vent leading directly into the flue. It was loose, not broken. Just accessible. Emma could never have fit through the gap. But someone smaller might have, or something could be passed through. Vega turned slowly, her flashlight catching the edge of a small, rectangular object near the corner. She stepped forward and picked it up. A compact mirror, cracked, its hinge rusted shut. Inside, pressed beneath the shattered glass, was a photo. Grainy and creased. 2 girls smiling in ski jackets. Emma and Kelsey. Vega felt her breath catch. Someone had kept it here. Not buried, not discarded. Hidden. And if someone had gone through the trouble of sealing this crawl space, of carefully storing what was left behind, it meant one thing. This wasn't a mistake. Emma's disappearance wasn't random. It was deliberate. And it was protected. The mirror photo changed everything. Detective Vega sat in her rental car, parked just below the lodge's north entrance, turning the cracked compact over in her hand. The photo inside was unmistakable, Emma and Kelsey bundled in their ski gear, cheeks pink from cold mid-laugh. It hadn't been printed from a yearbook or copied from her school file. This was personal. Private. A moment caught between friends. And someone had stashed it within reach of the flue where Emma's boots had surfaced. She had it tested, no fingerprints, no recent DNA, just the aged residue of dust and time. But that didn't matter. The mirror hadn't been meant to be found, and whoever hid it hadn't expected the chimney to ever give up its secrets. Vega spread out the floor plans again, this time overlaying them with her own notes from the crawl space. The alignment didn't make sense unless there had once been a connecting wall between room 305 and the vent. A makeshift passage, later boarded up during renovations. She returned to the room, flashlight in hand, and inspected the paneling one more time. Tucked inside a thin crack near the vent, she found a nail, blackened with age, sticking out at a slight angle. It wasn't part of the original build, it was a hook. And it had been used to hang something. Not for storage. For display. A keepsake. A shrine. The air was colder here, still, like the room was holding its breath. That night, Vega called Kelsey again. She didn't ask about the photo. She simply said, "Did Emma have a necklace she never took off?" Kelsey was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, "A little gold pendant, tiny pinecone charm. Her sister gave it to her." "Do you still have it?" "No," Kelsey said. "She was wearing it the day she disappeared." Vega's stomach tightened. The next morning, she returned to the crawl space with a small handheld magnet. It clinked against something tucked behind the vent grate. Reaching carefully, she pulled it free. A necklace. Tarnished, bent, but unmistakable. A pinecone pendant. Emma had been here, and someone had been keeping her close long after she vanished. Snow had started to fall again, light as ash, as Detective Vega stood outside the old maintenance shed behind the lodge. It hadn't been used in years, the lock rusted, the door swollen from decades of storms. But something about it bothered her. The blueprints showed a single room 12 by 12, used for tools and snow gear. But a note scribbled in the margin, nearly faded, read, "Secondary key access, staff only." She'd missed it before. She jimmied the door open. Inside, the shed was mostly empty. An old workbench, a broken shovel, bins full of rusted screws and nails. The air smelled like rot and oil. But in the back corner, behind a collapsed shelving unit, was what looked like a trap door. She pulled at the edge. It groaned open with a sound like a breath held too long. A wooden staircase descended into the dark. She turned on her flashlight. The basement was crude stone walls, dirt floor, a single hanging bulb that still worked when she flipped the switch. She stepped slowly, the silence pressing in around her. There were shelves down there. Old paint cans, stacks of lodge linens, all brittle and yellowing, but against the far wall was something strange. A wooden cabinet, freestanding, with a paneled front. It looked like it belonged in a dining room, not a tool shed. She opened it. Inside, wrapped in a dry, moth-eaten towel, was a journal. She didn't touch it at first. Instead, she looked around because someone had made sure it stayed hidden, and someone had checked on it. Recently. Dust had been brushed away, faint footprints pressed into the dirt. Not old. Maybe weeks. Maybe days. Vega gently opened the cover. The first page read, "Property of E. Harper. Please don't read unless you know me really, really well." She turned another page. Then another. It was Emma's handwriting. Sketched flowers in the margins. Notes about classmates. A list titled, "Things I'll Never Say Out Loud." And then, buried halfway through, an entry dated February 18th, 1992. "I saw him again today. He watched me from the hallway. I think he knows I remember." Vega's hands went still. Emma hadn't run. She'd been hiding. And now, her words were finally speaking. The journal became a map. Detective Vega took it back to her motel room, spreading its worn pages across the desk like pieces of a long-lost puzzle. Emma's voice came through in uneven ink, funny one moment, scared the next. There were stories of snowball fights, daydreams about college, even sketches of the mountain skyline from her window. But then came the shift. In a series of entries marked only with the dates leading up to her disappearance, Emma described something darker, an unnamed man she kept seeing around the lodge. Not a teacher, not a student. Someone she claimed wasn't on the staff list. Someone who always lingered in the shadows of the stairwells and empty hallways, especially after curfew. "He's not supposed to be here," she wrote on February 14th. "I asked Kells if she's seen him. She hasn't. I don't think I'm crazy, but it's like he knows when I'm alone." Then, another line, hastily scribbled days later. "I heard crying last night from behind the staff room door. I swear someone else is here." Emma had circled the word crying twice, as if begging herself not to forget it. Vega leaned back, letting the implications settle. This wasn't just a girl with an overactive imagination. Emma was noticing patterns, watching, writing it all down because she didn't know who to trust. And then she found the list. At the back of the journal, on a torn-out notebook page stuffed between the last entries, was a list of initials. Some she recognized: classmates, chaperones, but one set stood out: J.A. It was the only one underlined, and next to it, Emma had written, "Maintenance? Not on room roster." Vega stared at it. It wasn't much, but it was something. She drove back to the sheriff's office and requested access to the 1992 employee logs again. Most of the maintenance crew were accounted for, retired, relocated, some deceased. Except one. James Albee, seasonal hire, worked only that February. No address, no forwarding contact, no termination record. It was like he vanished the moment Emma did. And now, 7 years later, his initials had come back inked in fear by the girl no one had listened to. Until now. Detective Vega didn't sleep that night. She stayed up combing through what few records remained on James Albee. There was no social security file in the lodge's system, just a handwritten note in the old hiring binder. J. Albee, snow crew, temp, referred by L.M. The signature beneath was smudged, but the date stood out. Hired the week before the senior trip. No photo, no background check. Just a name and a job that vanished once the snow melted. The next morning, she tracked down L.M. Leonard Marks, the former lodge manager who had signed off on all seasonal workers that year. He lived alone now, in a weather-beaten trailer just outside Glenmore. He answered the door in flannel pajamas, blinking at Vega like she was a ghost. "I don't remember any girl," he said, shaking his head when she showed him Emma's photo. "So many kids came through that place." Vega didn't believe him. She showed him the initials. J.A. That gave him pause. "Jimmy Albee?" he muttered. "Yeah. Strange one. Didn't say much. Kept to himself. We had a rough storm. That year needed extra hands on the roof and chimney flues. He showed up. Said he'd done repair work before. Did he live on site? Had a room above the maintenance hall. Don't think he slept there much, though. Seemed more comfortable in the old back stairwell place nobody used after we sealed off that wing, creeped people out." "Why'd you let him go?" Leonard's eyes drifted. "Didn't have to. One day he was just gone. Left his coat, boots, everything. Never came back for his check." Vega's jaw tightened. "What about police reports? Anything?" Leonard shrugged. "Didn't seem like a problem. He was just some drifter kid. Probably found better pay elsewhere." But Vega could see it. In the way he shifted, in how he wouldn't meet her eyes. There was something he wasn't saying. Back in her car, Vega pulled out Emma's journal again. She flipped to the back and stared at that underlined name, J.A. Emma hadn't just suspected him. She'd seen him, heard him. And now the only man who could answer for it had vanished just as cleanly. But Vega didn't believe in clean disappearances anymore. The snow came harder that afternoon, veiling the mountain in silence once again. Detective Vega stood outside the maintenance wing of the lodge, eyes fixed on a rusted door, half sunk in drift. This was the old stairwell. Leonard Marks had mentioned the one no longer in use, sealed after renovations in the mid-90s. A place forgotten by everyone except, maybe, the one person who needed it most. She pulled on the handle, locked, as expected. But the frame was brittle, the wood warped from years of storms and frost. It gave with a sharp crack, revealing a narrow stairwell swallowed in shadow. The air was thick with dust, stale and metallic. Vega clicked on her flashlight and descended slowly, each step groaning under her weight. At the bottom, she found a small landing and a door that once led into the main basement, long since sealed by drywall on the other side. But to her left, behind a broken panel, was something unexpected, a crawl space cut behind the chimney foundation. Low, cramped, hidden. She crouched and pushed inside. The smell hit first old wood, rot, something faintly sweet and wrong. Her light caught on scattered objects, a thermos, a crumpled parka, a broken watch. Things no one had reported missing, because no one had known they were gone. And in the far corner, tucked behind a sheet of particle board nailed sloppily to the wall, she found it. A small wooden box. It was old, but clean, preserved. She opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, blurry, dark, taken at odd angles, faces caught mid-turn, some students, some staff. Most were unremarkable. But one wasn't. Emma. She was standing near the North Trail, red parka zipped high, her back turned, unaware of the camera. Beneath the photo, folded carefully, was a note written on lodge stationery. No name, no date. She knows. She won't stop asking. Vega's heart pounded. This wasn't just fear or suspicion. This was stalking, documenting, planning. Emma hadn't run into danger by accident. She'd been watched, hunted, cornered. And whoever did it had left behind a breadcrumb trail of obsession, a trail that had waited patiently, buried in snow and stone, for someone willing to follow it. The photo of Emma felt heavier than paper should. Detective Vega stared at it under the sterile light of the sheriff's office evidence room, her breath visible in the frigid air, another reminder that the past was never truly gone, only sleeping. The image had been developed in a homemade darkroom, probably within the lodge itself. The composition was amateur, shaky, but it wasn't meant for memory, it was meant for possession. She spread the other photos across the table. Students in hallways, girls near the hot tub, two teachers laughing by the vending machines. All of them framed from a distance, through windows or half-closed doors. Some blurred, some sharp, each one invaded. The obsession hadn't started with Emma, but it had ended with her. Vega flipped through the stack again and found another anomaly. A photo of the third-floor hallway, in the background, a mirror. Reflected in its surface, a man's figure. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a maintenance uniform. His face was obscured by glare, but the outline was there. She zoomed in and printed it. Back at the station, she ran the image through facial approximation software, overlaying what little she could find from archived staff photos. One stood out. A maintenance worker from 1992. Not James Albee, but someone else entirely. A man named Neil Prosser, who'd been employed at the lodge under a fake name for just 3 months. The file was incomplete. His original ID had been flagged in a background check that was never followed up on. His real name? Nathaniel Albert James, born 1963. Arrested twice in Oregon in the 80s for trespassing and unlawful surveillance, charges dropped, disappeared from public records in 1991. Remerged as James Albee in Pinevale in 1992. Vega's throat tightened. He hadn't vanished. He'd slipped into the cracks, changed his name, and vanished into seasonal work no one tracked. And Emma Sharp, observant, brave, had seen something she wasn't meant to. The boots, the necklace, the journal, none of it had been carelessly left. It had all been part of a pattern, a message almost, one Vega couldn't shake. Whoever he was, he'd been methodical, but he hadn't expected someone to come looking after all this time. Now, he was the one being hunted. and the past was no longer his to keep. Vega's hands shook as she placed the photo of Neil Prosser on the table in front of her. His face was younger, his eyes darker, but the shape of him was unmistakable. The man in the mirror, the shadow lurking in the hallways, the one who'd been hiding in plain sight. She'd spent the better part of the morning digging into his past, cross-referencing old records and confirming the details of his disappearance. The trail was faint, fading to nothing like a distant echo, but it was enough, just enough to know that Emma had been right. She sat back in her chair, taking a moment to breathe. Outside, the snow had started falling again, a quiet blizzard that coated the world in soft, steady white. But inside, the quiet felt different. He had been here. He had been watching. Vega had already called in backup. The sheriff had authorized a search of Prosser's last known address, but the house had been abandoned for years, a dead lead. There had been no trace of him, not even an old ID in the drawers, but something still nagged at Vega. The photo. The fact that he'd been so careful. Her phone rang, the sudden noise pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Kelsey. "Detective? I need to tell you something." Vega sat up straight, a spike of concern running through her. "What's wrong?" "Two remembered something," Kelsey said, her voice tight. "Before Emma disappeared, she told me something strange. She said someone had been following her, but she didn't want to say who. She thought it was someone in the lodge, one of the staff, but she didn't know who." Vega's heart skipped a beat. "Did she mention anything else?" Kelsey's voice cracked. "She said she thought she saw something behind the maintenance door, a shadow. I don't know what she meant, but she was afraid." Vega's mind raced. The pieces were falling into place too quickly now, each one aligning with the last. It wasn't just that Emma had been watched. It wasn't just that someone had kept her close. She had been targeted. And Emma had seen something. The truth was clearer now than ever before. And someone wasn't done hiding. The call came just after midnight. A deputy from the next county over reported a break-in at an old hunting cabin along the Ridge Trail State property, long abandoned but recently accessed. Snowprints led in but not out. Inside, the deputy found an old cot, a rusted lantern, and next to it, something strange, a red scarf folded neatly on a wooden chair. On it, stitched in faded thread, were the initials E.H. Vega was already in her car before he'd finished the sentence. She drove through a curtain of snowfall, tires groaning along the winding pass, the headlights catching glimpses of forest between bends. The ridge trail was barely marked anymore, a narrow offshoot known mostly to hunters and lost hikers. But it wasn't far from the lodge, only 6 miles as the crow flies. Far enough to disappear. Close enough to watch. The cabin sat slouched under the weight of snow, its chimney cracked, windows frosted from the inside. The door had been forced, but not shattered. Whoever was there hadn't rushed. They'd known the place. Inside, the air was cold, but stale. Someone had been here recently, but not long ago. Vega stepped over cracked tiles and broken glass, her flashlight sweeping across dust-covered floorboards. On the cot were blankets. On the wall, faint scratches. Not letters, not drawings, just marks, as if someone had spent time carving away the silence. But it was the scarf that caught her. She picked it up gently, gloved fingers trembling. The stitching was identical to the tag on the boots. Emma's initials. Her mother had sewn them into everything she packed that year, afraid her daughter would lose something. And now here it was, preserved. Deliberate. Someone had brought it here. Someone who wanted to remember, or be remembered. She turned and scanned the room again. This hadn't been a panic hideout, it was something more calculated. There were water bottles stacked near the wall, recent wrappers, even a pair of men's gloves drying by the stove. Whoever had stayed here hadn't just come to hide. They'd come to revisit. The journal, the pendant, the scarf. Vega felt it deep in her gut. This was more than obsession. It was ritual. And whoever he was, he'd never really left. The silence inside the cabin felt like it had a memory of its own. Vega stood still, listening. Not for sounds, there were none, but for the weight of everything left behind: the scarf, the gloves, the faint outline of boots pacing a worn trail between the cot and the window. Whoever had stayed here hadn't just been hiding, they'd been watching. She moved toward the window and pushed aside the frost with her sleeve. The view was narrow, but through the trees, if you knew what to look for, you could just make out the glint of the lodge's rooftop. A sliver of tin under gray sky. From this cabin, someone could have tracked the coming and going of guests, staff, kids. Emma. Vega turned away from the glass and returned to the makeshift sleeping area. The cot sagged with age, but beneath it she found an old thermos with faded ski lodge branding, and beside it a torn corner of a photograph. She picked it up carefully. It showed part of a smiling girl's face cut off at the eyes, but the hair, the jacket, the stitching on the collar, it matched the photo from Emma's journal. This wasn't just memorabilia. It was a collection. Each item brought here intentionally. A private archive for someone who needed to hold on to control the memory. She bagged the items and stepped outside. The snow had slowed, but daylight was fading fast. On the trail near the tree line, she noticed tracks. Recent. Not from the deputies, not from her. Just one set, angled away from the cabin, disappearing into the woods. She crouched beside them. Boots. Wide stride, not rushed. He had been here, maybe just hours before, maybe less. She radioed for support and followed the trail. As she walked, her thoughts raced. Emma had made it close to whatever truth she'd seen. She had gathered pieces, hidden them, written them down. Maybe she'd planned to confront him. Maybe she tried. And now Vega was walking that same line, between snow and silence, between memory and something darker. The mountain wasn't just holding secrets anymore. It was leading her straight to them. The trail wound deeper into the woods, narrowing until Vega was moving between trees rather than on any formal path. The snow here was undisturbed, save for the single set of boot prints fresh enough that her own steps fell beside them like shadows chasing after truth. Whoever she was following wasn't running, they were leading. She checked her radio. Static. The trees here were dense, the ridge steep, no signal. But she kept going. Eventually, the trail veered sharply downhill toward a frozen creek. On the far bank, the tracks disappeared beneath a cluster of old boulders where the rock face had collapsed decades ago. Just above it, built into the hillside, was the collapsed ruin of a supply shed barely visible under years of snow, vines, and rot. But the door stood ajar. Vega approached cautiously, hand resting on the grip of her sidearm. Inside, it was dark. Colder than outside. She flicked on her flashlight. The shed was little more than a skeleton, now half the roof gone, walls leaning inward, but someone had cleared a space near the back, a fire pit made of old bricks, a rolled sleeping bag, a lantern still warm to the touch. And hanging from a nail in the corner, right at eye level, was something that stopped her cold. A laminated prom photo. Emma, smiling, her arm linked with Kelsey's. Same dress from the missing persons posters, same grin. It had been protected, preserved, like a shrine to a moment before everything broke. Beneath it, nailed into the wall, was a name scratched in with the tip of a key. Emma H. Not lost, not gone, just herself. Vega stared at it, her breath misting in the cold air. This wasn't the work of someone who wanted to forget. This was someone who remembered in vivid, frozen detail. She turned back toward the entrance, heart pounding now, because if he was still watching, still nearby, she had entered his cathedral. And Emma hadn't been taken and discarded. She had been held, worshipped, stalked, trapped inside someone's twisted memory. Vega stepped outside and finally heard it, the faint, deliberate crunch of snow behind her. She wasn't alone anymore. Vega didn't turn around right away. The snow behind her had settled, and so had her heartbeat, only just enough to keep her hands steady on the grip of her weapon. She waited, listening. Another step, closer now. Crunch, then silence. The woods held their breath with her. Then, a voice, low, calm, almost curious. "I figured someone would come eventually." She turned slowly, flashlight angled just low enough not to blind. A man stood a dozen feet away, dressed in layered flannel and a canvas coat dusted in snow. His beard was gray, short, but his eyes were sharp, clear, and familiar. "You're James Albee?" she asked, voice steady. He shook his head once. "Not for a long time." "Nathaniel James," she corrected. "That's your real name." A faint smile crossed his lips, something more tired than amused. "Didn't think anyone remembered that." Vega stepped sideways, inching toward the trail while keeping her light on him. "Emma Harper remembered. She saw you in the lodge, wrote about you in her journal. You knew she was looking into you." "She was smart," he said. "Too smart." For a long moment they just stood there, snow falling soft between them, time hanging like fog in the cold air. He didn't move toward her, didn't run, just watched. "You kept her things," Vega said. "Her necklace, her photo, her scarf. Why?" He looked past her, to the shed behind them. "She wasn't like the others. She saw me. Not just the version I pretended to be. She saw what I'd done, what I might do. She wasn't afraid, not until the end." Vega's pulse spiked. Her voice dropped. "What happened to her?" His eyes met hers. "She found the crawl space. The old vent in room 305. That's when I knew I couldn't leave. Not again." "Where is she?" Vega asked, softer now. He blinked slowly. "Everywhere." Then, without warning, he moved. Fast, not toward her, away, into the trees. Vega shouted and gave chase, snow exploding under her boots, flashlight beam darting between trunks and shadows. But in the heavy silence of the forest, his footsteps faded like breath in winter. Gone. Just like before. Vega's legs burned from the chase, each step driven by the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The trees blurred around her, each shadow a potential hiding spot. She moved fast, but not fast enough. His footprints had vanished too quickly, swallowed by the deep snow and the relentless flurries that now danced between the trunks of the pines. She slowed to a jog, pausing at the edge of the ridge. The wind howled through the forest, carrying nothing but silence back. It felt too quiet, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. "Vega!" The voice cut through the stillness, sharp, familiar. She whipped around. It was Deputy Cole, his coat half covered in snow, panting. His flashlight cut through the falling snowflakes, but there was no sign of Nathaniel James. "He's gone," Vega said, shaking her head. "He disappeared." "Not exactly." Cole's face was hard, his eyes scanning the tree line. "We found something else." Vega's chest tightened. "What?" He nodded toward the direction they had come from. "A shed down the hill. It's more than just an old storage building." Vega didn't waste a moment. They both sprinted back, boots crunching over the snow, hearts racing. When they reached the shed again, Vega could already see the disarray footprints, fresh and deep, scattered across the ground like they'd been made in a hurry. The door had been pulled open, carelessly, the hinges broken. Inside, it was more than a simple abandoned structure. The walls were lined with old photos, pinned hastily. Many of them were faded, yellowed with age, but some were newer. Some were recent. And there, in the center of the room, was a large homemade collage. Emma's face, her smile, the same photos from her journal, the same pictures Kelsey had shared, all arranged meticulously, like pieces of a puzzle meant to be completed. Vega stepped forward, a chill spreading through her. "This was never about her disappearance," she whispered. "It was about control." Cole's voice came from behind her. "How much longer do you think he's been doing this?" Vega didn't answer right away. The truth was already clear. He hadn't just disappeared, Emma. He'd kept her. In pieces. In memories. Waiting for someone to come back. And now, Vega realized, someone else was going to pay the price for that waiting. Morning broke slow and gray, the sun a faint blur behind a sky of gauze. Vega hadn't slept. No one had. The team combed the ridge trail and surrounding woods, but the snow was no longer just cold, it was concealment. The kind that swallowed footprints, buried clues, erased hours. The shrine inside the shed was being processed, each photo tagged and bagged, but Vega couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late for something. Nathaniel James had been watching, planning, and now, running. Or, worse, preparing. Back at the sheriff's office, she spread the photos out again. Emma's face smiled up from nearly every one, her jacket, her boots, her soft expressions frozen in time. But there was something else now. Something new. In the background of one of the more recent shots, a reflection in a window. Another girl. Younger. Dark hair. Vega zoomed in. Not Emma. Not from the old group of students. She checked the timestamp. This photo wasn't from 1992. It was from 2 weeks ago. Her heart dropped. She called Cole over. This isn't just about the past. He's still hunting. Cole stared at the image. Who is she? Vega shook her head. That's what we need to find out. She pushed further into the database, cross-referencing every missing person within the last month who might have passed through Glenmore or the ski routes. After nearly an hour of cross-checking, she found her. Samantha Reeve, 16, went missing after a family cabin trip 10 days ago, reported by her parents when she didn't return from a solo hike. Vega leaned back in her chair, the photo of Samantha now side by side with one of Emma's. The same fear in the eyes. The same look of being watched without knowing how close danger really was. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was rescue. Vega stood, her voice low but urgent. He's doing it again, and this time we have a window. If we move now, we might stop him before another girl disappears forever. Because Emma's voice had finally led them here. And now it was time to listen with everything they had left. The storm returned without warning, cloaking the mountain in a white silence that made every breath feel like borrowed time. Vega tightened her coat as the search team moved up the eastern ridge, following the route Samantha Reeve's parents said she liked to hike, quiet, scenic, and dangerously remote. The girl's boot prints had been found by a forestry crew, leading to an old ranger's outpost long since closed. Vega hadn't dared hope, but now she could feel it, the pieces pulling towards something. Emma's trail hadn't just reopened an old case, it had cracked open a door to the present. The outpost came into view like a ghost house buried in drift, roof bowed under snow, but smoke curled faintly from the chimney. Someone was inside. Vega raised her fist, signaling the others to hang back, and approached slowly. The boards creaked underfoot, announcing her presence whether she wanted them to or not. Her hand hovered over her holster as she pushed the door open. The warmth hit her first, then the smell of old pine and something faintly sour mold maybe. The room was dim, lit only by a dying fire and a single lantern on the floor. And there she was. Samantha. Curled on a cot in the corner, eyes wide and dazed, hair tangled, lips chapped. She didn't scream, she didn't move, she just stared, like she couldn't believe someone was real. Vega dropped to her knees beside her. It's okay, you're safe now, I'm here to take you home. Samantha blinked slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. He said no one was looking. But someone had been. Before Vega could ask where he was, a sound from behind, a thump, a creak. She turned, gun drawn, heart pounding. Nothing, just shadows. But she knew he was close. She moved fast, shouting to the team as she guided Samantha outside. The girl clung to her, every step a quiet triumph. Backup swarmed the cabin, weapons raised, voices echoing through the trees. But Nathaniel James was already gone. Again. like a ghost in the snow. But this time, Vega didn't feel defeated, because a girl was walking out alive, and Emma's voice had led them here. The sun broke through the clouds 2 days later, low and gold and quiet like it knew better than to arrive in fanfare. Snow still blanketed the peaks, but the wind had stilled. In the clearing below the lodge, Vega stood with Samantha's parents as they held their daughter like she might disappear again if they blinked. The girl barely spoke, but her eyes had changed. They were no longer hollow, they held something fragile, but alive. Vega didn't linger. She gave them space, walking alone to the base of the slope where the boots had first been found. She stood in the exact spot, letting the cold seep in through her soles. 7 years ago, Emma's name had vanished into wind and snow. Now it lived in paper trails, stitched cloth, and a girl saved just in time. The search for Nathaniel James continued. Border alerts, cabin sweeps, thermal drones. But he was gone again. Like smoke, like myth. But Vega no longer believed in the kind of disappearances that stayed buried. She believed in the things that waited. Emma had waited. So had the truth. At the station, she built a new case filone with Emma's name at the top in bold, not faded. Inside it, she placed the journal, the photo with the mirrored figure, the scarf, the boots, and finally, a note. It was handwritten, folded in quarters, discovered at the ranger outpost beneath the cot. It read simply. She never screamed. She just stared at me like she knew I didn't belong. That was the worst part. There was no name, no date. But it was proof. Not enough for trial. Not yet. But enough to know that Emma had been right all along. Before Vega left, she added one last item to the file, a new photo. Samantha, wrapped in a blanket, standing in the snow, eyes closed, face turned toward the sun. Vega closed the folder. Not all endings were clean. But some began with a girl who saw too much, wrote it all down, and trusted that someday someone would read between the lines. Emma Harper had vanished. But her voice had finally come home.